Welcome again to our fantastic equity event today. With me is Jonathan Koppell. He's been president of New Jersey's Montclair State University since August of 2021. I want to say at the outset that if I go gently on Jonathan, it's not because he's got a sponsor tag on his credential, it's because his mother is here. And I would like to acknowledge your presence. Thank you so much for coming, ma'am. Much appreciated. All right, Jonathan, we've heard a lot about higher ed already today. Some of the topics that we're going to tackle are going to be similar to some previous panels, but obviously you come to this as someone running an individual institution in higher ed. 4 years ago, a generation of high school seniors were effectively robbed of their graduation experience by COVID. I want to ask this pithily, but I understand that it's a deeply emotional question. Are the kids all right?
Many are, but many are not. I mean, that's a legitimate question. And some of those students just walked across the stage for the first time at the recent graduation we held at the Prudential Center in Newark. And it was a great celebration, in part because the students finally got to have that experience and the families finally got to have that experience. But it also demonstrated what the solution is to many of the problems that were talked about already, right? So at our graduation, the majority of our students are the first in their families to go to college. We're a majority minority institution. And so the success of Montclair State University and the success of our students is evidence of what happens when you do have equity in opportunity and when you are attentive to the challenges that emerge, including the challenges that COVID presented, which I was very glad that there was some allusion to the inequity in the solution of everybody just go online. That did not cut evenly across the population, and we saw that in our own students.
I will get back to the first generation college attendees, but I want to stay on the mental health of this generation a little bit because you are facing, the pandemic did not create the crisis in youth mental health, but it certainly worsened it. And you've written about this, and I read a couple of the things that you said that struck me. Can you talk about conflict resolution, for example, for this generation?
Well, I think if you talk to anybody who's actually running a university, they'll all tell you that the mental health of students is one of the foremost challenges that we face. I mean, in a very profound way. And sometimes you see online commentary, and it's like, these kids just need to be told no, they're soft. It's like, it's a little more complicated than that. I mean, there's profound struggle, profound questions of optimism regarding the future, and profound setbacks in terms of social development, which I think has caused people to have challenges in terms of conflict resolution on prosaic matters of fights with roommates, but also on more significant things. When you run into an obstacle in the university, do you power through it, or do you say, I'm defeated and walk away? And so when you read about, I just like to connect this to things that you read. When you read about administrators, and colleges are bloated with non-faculty, a significant chunk of that is mental health professionals. We've added counselors, we've added people who are working with students on their mental health. Every university in the country has done that. That shows up as administrators or non-faculty, but it's a huge, huge demand. And here's the reality. That is the reason why a lot of students don't complete. Some of the speakers made the point that it's not always money. That is a huge reason why people get off the tracks towards their degree. And so if we don't address it, we're not fulfilling our mission to help students achieve their aspiration of a college degree.
So as an administrator, though, you're not just churning out degree recipients, you're not just teaching inside the classroom. A huge part of college is that sort of socialization with your peers.
Yes.
When did the shift to the focus on mental health really happen? I mean, I was struck, I just got my son through the college admissions process. I was struck by the emphasis at every institution that we visited. Stop 3 on the tour was a conversation about mental health.
Yes.
Not a factor back in the Coolidge administration when I was applying to college. But a very significant shift. I mean, every stop talked about academic support. That was familiar to me.
Yes.
But all of the, for lack of a better term, the mental health support, when did that shift really take place?
There is an interesting thing. Over the last 20 years, in the times that I've been doing this kind of stuff, the idea that the university should be acting to some degree in loco parentis has really taken root. And funny things that I kind of, because I had a similar experience, students ask for their parents to have access to their grades. I mean, I remember we had to act like, so, everything's online now, but students want their parents to be able to dive in, to see their assignments, to see their grades. They want it. And we as administrators who grew up with a different mindset were like, wait, they're complaining because their parents can't get in. Not every single one.
I would rather have been burned alive.
So it's odd. It's just a different thing. So the idea of helicopter parents, but students have grown up in a culture or with an expectation that their parents are going to be party to that. Not always in an oppressive, overbearing way, but sometimes in a partnership type of mode. So that's one change. The other change on the mental health front, which is a really great change, which is a lot of the stigma and the resistance to getting help has gone away through intentional effort. But it's a remarkable thing that in a poll of college students nationally, 70% said they expect to use mental health when they're in college. So it is a question that we get when students come on tour, and they want to know what the resources are. And we just, through the state of New Jersey, had a 24-hour-a-day telehealth offered for all of our students. Thousands of New Jersey students immediately picked that up, not embarrassed or not ashamed to admit that they want that counseling. I think that's a very positive development.
I'm the son of a senior, retired now, but senior college administrator. My late mother was a college professor. I grew up sort of in a lot of higher ed conversations. So when I say this, I'm not saying it for a laugh. I'm saying it because it's part of the hierarchy of needs. You wrote at one point in one of your columns that some of your students are turning to faculty to ask them questions like, how do I ask somebody out on a date? How has a situation like that made you repurpose resources on a college campus? Do you think universities have a responsibility to provide that sort of socialization, that kind of cultural knowledge?
Let me reframe it a little.
Sure.
I think that there are all kinds of hidden obstacles to success in college, not necessarily inability to get a date. But there are what we would call hidden prerequisites, things that you, growing up on campus, wouldn't think twice about doing. So if somebody says, well, go to the bursar's office, you would know what that meant. What does that mean, the bursar's office? But more profoundly, if you tried to register for a class and somebody says, no, sorry, Olivier, it's full, you would just go to the next person until you got the right answer. You wouldn't walk away. You would press at it. If you're the first in your family to go to college and you get that no, you will walk away. And you will walk away even if that means that you're not able to take the prerequisite, which is going to allow you to register for the class in the spring, which if you don't take, you're going to have to do an extra semester. This happens all the time. That could be a thousands of dollars decision, but you're comfortable on that campus. You know that you belong. And so what we have to do as universities is say, when are we throwing barriers in front of students unintentionally, but barriers that get people off track and then reduce the likelihood of completion. The previous speaker talked about debt and so on. The reality is when we talk about the debt crisis, 40% of college debt in this country is people who don't have a degree. So most people, if you earn a college degree, you're going to be okay in terms of your debt burden. I can find a story of somebody who studied poetry and basket weaving, and now they're, yes, we can find those stories. But that's not the vast majority. The vast majority are people who get a degree. If you don't complete, however, it is true to say, you might be worse off than if you had never started at all. So when you have the conversation about is college worth it, the question is a college degree worth it? Absolutely. Every bit of data says a college degree makes sense. But that puts a huge burden on us as institutions to solve our own issues when we've gotten in the way of success.
Not to pick on the poetry majors, but does the university have, does the higher education system have a responsibility to advise or steer students out of those kinds of specializations, whether they're majors or concentrations, into things that have more practical applications?
No. I don't think so. I think we have a responsibility to help students think about their future, and there are plenty of people who do very well with poetry degrees. If you look at CEOs, they have history degrees, they have philosophy degrees. But we can't absolve ourselves of responsibility for students to think about their future and to help prepare them to that, to talk to the poetry student about how to use the skills that they've acquired in the course of studying in that topic area to get a job and have a future. There still remains within some universities, I think, a resistance to this idea. They'll say, well, we're not a trade school, and it's not my job to help we're not a job placement agency. And it's like, well, wait a second. The idea that wasn't our problem was very appropriate in the 19th century when only the elite of the elite of the elite earned a college degree. But once you make higher education more accessible and more inclusive, you have to accept the responsibility that the population you're serving doesn't have a future guaranteed, and they are worried about how they're going to pay for the degree that they just acquired. And so it's our responsibility to help them acquire the skills and the mindset to take care of themselves post-graduation. That doesn't mean you have to study a STEM. But it does mean that we have to be participants in that process for the students.
Jonathan, you alluded to first-generation college attendees. That is something that every university that my family visited talked about, the importance of bringing in first-generation. You wrote something really perceptive about that phenomenon, though, which is that a first-generation college student is also likely to turn into a first-generation professional.
Yes.
And I know I'm being a little repetitive here, but how does that shape Montclair University's mission?
It's huge, and it builds on what I just said. And I didn't think about this myself until somebody said it to me several years ago, and they said, this person you're so proud of that, how are you preparing them for jobs that nobody in their family has had and experiences that nobody in their family has had? And it actually made a big impression. And I've heard stories now over the years. I met one person who, just by luck, was off to go to his job interview in the fabulous 70s, and his professor grabbed him as he was going in his neon green tuxedo to a job interview because he's like, it's the only suit I have. And I was like, stop, don't do that. You have to prepare people for that reality. I mean, I've met with students and talked to them about schmoozing. Like, everybody here knows how to schmooze. You're all talking to each other. Like, people you don't know, you walk over to them and say hi. Like, that's a profoundly weird thing to do. But that's how you succeed in the world. So you actually have to be self-conscious of that. We're extremely proud that we are, to the theme of the conference, we're in the top 10 universities nationally for social mobility. Now, it's partially because our students graduate at a rate that vastly exceeds what the demographic prediction would be. The sad reality is if you want one data point to predict whether somebody's going to graduate from college, don't ask what their grades were in high school, ask what their family income is. That's reality. Our students I don't know whether to clap for that or not, right? But that is reality. So our students graduate at 15 percentage points higher than you'd expect given the demographics of our population. And then they go out and they earn at a marginally beneficial rate given their Montclair degree, such that they pay off whatever costs they have in under 2 years. That puts us in a very rarefied territory. I think that's because we're self-conscious about designing an educational experience that prepares them for after college. Lots of hands-on learning experiences, lots of engagement, not education as an abstraction, but high-quality education that goes with the accessibility. One without the other doesn't really do it.
I mean, I've mentored young journalists for years now, and I'm struck by the value, the high value of a simple piece of advice like, you gotta write a thank you email after that informational interview. Now, some of that's generational. They might send a punctuationless, uncapitalized text, but you got to teach them to do these basic things. This idea of a cultural learning experience at university. You're not just getting a physics lab. You're not just getting an accounting class. You're also getting all the socialization. The schmoozing, for example, I think is super important, and sometimes gets lost. It's not just about getting equity and access to education. It's also all these other needs, and that's why I wanted to.
But all those things are tied to equity, right? So a lot of those experiences come through internships. Like, everybody talks about internships, and everybody knows, well, but if you can't, who gets to do an unpaid internship? It's not somebody who has to have a job to support their family. That's our students. I would love to be able to pay for all of our students to have internships, but they can't all do it. We do a lot, but we are hamstrung by the finances of all this. And I want to take a big magic marker and underscore Ivory's comments from the last panel, because yes, it's on the students to some degree, but it's on all of us. We all know that the opportunities for people with degrees from the right universities are different than the opportunities for people from degrees from Montclair State University and other fine universities like ours. I'm not singling us out. We have to change the heuristics by which we judge people and not put a premium on exclusion. Right? That's what those schools are. Those schools are about exclusion. The first thing they want to tell you is how many people they reject. By the way, not how big a difference the education that you get at those schools makes in their life, but that they were chosen while most people were not. That's what those, we have to reject that and say, well, what is the quality of the human being? What did they accomplish? What do they bring? Don't look at the pedigree. The reality is that the marginal changes in who gets into the Harvards, the Yales of the world, that's not going to achieve equity in this country. It's nice, it's better if they're more accessible, but it's going to be how we create opportunities for people who go to the vast majority of institutions which are not premised on exclusion.
All right, I'm going to lead the witness a little bit.
Okay.
How has the fairly dramatic shift towards early decision affected equity in higher education?
It doesn't affect me at all, right? I mean, the reality is for an institution like Montclair and the vast majority of institutions, we are trying to make ourselves broadly accessible, and the FAFSA debacle has a much bigger effect on our students, quite frankly, than the early decision and the things that affect the rarefied universe of those things. I think what those types of changes do, though, is make plain that these institutions are seeking to advance their own interests, right? That they're trying to manipulate the rules so that people make commitments, and I think it illustrates the gamification of the entire college admissions process, and the way in which we're all willing participants in it. Myself included. My kids are in college. We recognize the rules of the game, and we're going through the application process of my son, and we're looking at all those things. It's all part of the pathology of the focus on exclusion that we need to resist. And I think as we talk about, I was very glad that some of the speakers pointed out, I think Catherine particularly in the last panel, not everybody is down with equity.
Yeah.
Right? But let me be clear about this. It's not just the bad guys who are, it's also, to some degree, look in the mirror. Like, we all do things that are anti-equity in our own actions because we're trying to do best by our kids and so on, and we're trying to work to advance ourselves within a system that is unequal, even if we all believe that the inequality of the system needs to be destroyed. And so there's challenges to this.
In the morning panel that I moderated, Jennifer raised an interesting point about a certain tension. Maybe that's not the right word, but that's the one that comes to mind between managing a problem and making structural change.
Right.
So in the interest of talking about that kind of tension, I'm going to ask you, and we have a minute and a half for something that's kind of deep. Who's the most powerful person on a college campus?
Well, look, I'm in my job because I think that there's some power here. And the power is in direct response to what Jennifer was talking about. So I agree that we have to deal with the systemic sources of inequality, and we have to, and by the way, that includes dealing with the opposition to equity as an idea. I don't know if anybody's really paying attention to that graphic symbol. That's really important, right? Because if that's the premise of a conversation about equity, if we grow those pieces, somebody's piece shrinks. Now I believe you can grow the pie and all that, but that's the reality, that people are saying, you're coming for my pie. And so if that's the reality, then you have to recognize that not everybody's going to be in favor of that. So what I can do at one institution, I can't change the system, but what I can show is how it could work. I use a quotation when I talk to students. I just did this at graduation the other day. It rings in my head all the time. Cicero said, criticize by what you create. We have lots of criticism on these phones that everybody's texting and commenting and thumbs down and all that. Enough, we don't need any more of that. Build what you think should be. So that's what we're trying to do at Montclair, and everything that we're doing is saying, how have we designed ourselves in a way that doesn't advance that? I'll give a minor example, but why do we have 3 months off in the summer? Like, so that people can go and work on their farms? Our students aren't going to the Hamptons, I can tell you that much. And so we're redesigning our whole academic calendar so that the summer becomes a semester just like the other parts of the year. And so somebody can complete a degree in 3 years. They save money, they save time. It's different than what higher ed has always been because higher ed was built for a different era. We have to tear down some of those things, reinvent it, and that's how you rebuild the system, one institution at a time, not necessarily solving all the problems of the world, but showing that those problems can be solved.
I could do this all day, but the clock is mercilessly at all zeros. Jonathan Koppell, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
It's really great.
Thank you, Ollie.